So I want you to picture a really specific memory for a second. Um, think about a time you've been looking forward to, like a Friday afternoon all week.
Oh, yeah, the classic weekend escape.
Right, exactly. You pack the tent, the sleeping bags, throw the cooler in the trunk, and you drive out of the city limits heading toward a state park.
Sounds perfect.
Yeah, and you follow this winding road lined with pines, you park the car, and you walk down to the edge of this perfectly still, mirror-like lake.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this heavy stone bathhouse sitting right on the shore. And it blends perfectly into the landscape. You look out over the water, maybe watch a heron take flight, and you likely feel this deep, reassuring sense of permanence.
Yeah, it feels timeless.
Exactly. You assume you're stepping into something ancient, something completely untouched. You believe, quite naturally, that the Earth has just looked exactly like this for, I don't know, 10,000 years.
It is an incredibly powerful illusion. I mean, we are culturally conditioned to view these spaces as primordial, right? You walk into the woods, you see a lake, and you think you're escaping human influence, like you're returning to the raw, original design of the planet.
Yeah, we think we're just visitors in a landscape that nature engineered all on its own. But the sources we're looking at for today's deep dive, they just completely shatter that illusion.
They really do. It's almost unsettling.
It is, because when you start digging into the historical archives,
Yeah.
you realize that this pristine, ancient landscape you're vacationing in, it's not a product of deep geological time at all.
No, not even close.
It's a manufactured stage.
Yeah.
Like, we are looking at a landscape that was intentionally, physically constructed,
Yeah.
essentially from the dirt up.
What you're actually looking at in so many of these cases is a massive public works project that's just been disguised by, 90 years of forest growth.
Right.
That mirror-like lake and that rustic stone bathhouse, they aren't timeless features of the Earth. They're highly specific pieces of 1930s infrastructure.
Which is just wild to think about. So welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we've gathered a really fascinating stack of sources to unpack this exact phenomena.
Yeah, we have a lot of ground to cover.
We do. We're pulling from historical archives of the U.S. Forest Service, early blueprints from the National Park Service, internal memos from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and even modern retrospective data from the EPA and logs from contemporary conservation crews.
It's a really comprehensive paper trail.
And our mission today is to trace this massive continental scale journey. We're going to start with the sheer desperation and the optimism of the 1930s, exploring how a vast army of unemployed young men literally invented the modern American outdoor weekend.
And then, crucially, and this is the tough part, we have to examine the other side of that historical ledger.
Right, the hidden costs.
Exactly. We're going to explore the environmental toll of that exact same construction. Because the sources present this really complex, dual-sided narrative.
Yeah, we have to impartially weigh this undeniably beloved democratic public legacy against some really severe ecological damage. Damage done in the name of early conservation, the drained wetlands, the eradicated predators, the engineered streams.
It's a lot to unpack. But to understand how this landscape was built, we really have to travel back to a very specific moment in American history.
1930s.
Right, specifically the window from 1933 to 1942. The Great Depression has this just suffocating grip on the country.
Unemployment is catastrophic, especially for young people.
It's dire. And in response, the federal government passes the Emergency Conservation Work Act, and this legislation launches the Civilian Conservation Corps.
The CCC, or the Tree Army, as they called them.
The Tree Army, yeah. We are talking about hundreds of thousands, eventually millions of unemployed young men who are given green uniforms, placed into these military-style camps, and just sent out into the American wilderness.
Yeah, the societal shift that occurs right at this moment, it's just foundational to everything we understand about modern leisure today.
It really is, because we have to remember, before the 1930s, the whole concept of a weekend getaway for the working class, that just didn't exist.
No, it was a luxury.
Completely. Leisure, like retreating to a mountain cabin or swimming in a pristine lake, that was almost exclusively a privilege for the wealthy. I mean, if you were a laborer in a steel mill in Pittsburgh or, say, a tenant farmer in Georgia, you work 6 days a week.
Right, Monday through Saturday.
Yeah. And Sunday was just reserved for church and basically physical recovery. The weekend, as we know it, defined by play and travel and outdoor recreation that hadn't materialized for the masses yet.
That is such a fundamental paradigm shift to wrap your head around. Because we just assume that throwing the kids in the car and heading to a public park has always been this baseline American right.
We take it totally for granted.
We do.
Yeah.
But the archives demonstrate that the CCC, working directly with state planners and the National Park Service, they had to actively manufacture that habit.
Yes. They normalized the concept of government-funded democratic leisure.
And the mechanism they used to pull this off was this program called recreational demonstration areas, or RDAs.
The RDAs are such a crucial stepping stone in this whole narrative. Basically, the government identified these massive tracts of submarginal farmland.
Land that was just totally exhausted.
Completely stripped of nutrients, deeply eroded by generations of really poor agricultural practices, just dead land. And these ruined landscapes were often located just a short drive from major industrial cities.
Which was the key, right?
Exactly. So the federal government steps in, buys this exhausted land, moves the farmers out, and sends the CCC in to completely transform the topography.
And their explicitly stated mandate for the RDA program was to democratize nature for urban dwellers. The quote is rich or poor.
Which is a beautiful sentiment, but just think about the scale of that mandate for a second.
Yeah, it's like a modern government buying up a sprawling, severely polluted industrial wasteland on the outskirts of a city.
Like an old factory site.
Right, and attempting to engineer it into a lush, thriving community nature reserve. Except the CCC was attempting this terraforming on a national systemic scale.
They were taking dead dirt and trying to manifest pristine wilderness for factory workers.
It's mind-blowing, and the timing of this effort creates this perfect historical collision, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Because the federal government is building the physical stage for mass outdoor recreation, cutting the trails, planting the trees, building the pavilions, right at the exact historical moment that the middle-class American family is acquiring the automobile.
Yes. The car changes everything. That combination is the catalyst. Suddenly, this urban family actually has a machine capable of escaping the smoggy city.
Exactly. The automobile provides the radius of travel. But without the RDAs and the new state parks, that car literally has nowhere to go on a Saturday afternoon.
You're just driving around in circles.
Right. And conversely, without the mass adoption of the car, these newly constructed parks remain completely inaccessible to the urban working class.
So together, the Ford Model T and the CCC basically engineered the modern habit of the weekend trip. It was a massive, highly successful social experiment.
Really was.
But I want to push back on the primary motivation here for a second. Based on some of the tensions we see in the agency records, was this grand vision of an American weekend the main goal all along? Or was this primarily an emergency economic relief program?
You mean just a desperate measure to put starving young men to work?
Yeah, exactly. So they could send their $25 a month back to their destitute families.
Well, the evolution of the mission is actually one of the most compelling aspects of the sources, because at its inception in 1933, the absolute overriding priority was economic relief and social stability, period.
They just needed to stop these guys from starving.
Yes. Get them off the freight trains where they were wandering aimlessly, give them 3 square meals a day, and put a shovel in their hands to build discipline. But here's the thing, you can't just ask 3 million young men to dig holes and fill them back in.
Right, the labor actually had to be directed towards something useful.
Exactly. And the initial direction was highly utilitarian.
Fighting forest fires, planting trees.
Millions of trees. They were aggressively fighting the massive soil erosion that was literally blowing the country away during the Dust Bowl era.
Right, the stakes were incredibly high.
They were. There were roughly 300 distinct types of work projects the CCC engaged in. But as the program matured, state planners and the National Park Service realized they had something totally unprecedented on their hands.
This massive, highly organized army of labor.
Exactly. A standing army of workers. They realized they could go way beyond mere triage. They could build permanent social infrastructure. So the immediate economic crisis provided the engine, but public recreation became the enduring architecture they left behind.
Okay, so to successfully invent this weekend, to give the public a destination that justified driving out of the city, the CCC had to build the absolute centerpiece of the summer vacation. They had to construct the water. And the sheer volume of these water management projects, it's just difficult to even comprehend.
It defies typical construction scales. When we analyze the CCC's infrastructure footprint, the official historical records document the manual construction of roughly 6.6 million small check dams.
Okay, we really need to pause on that figure. 6.6 million individual dams.
Built by hand.
How do you even conceptualize that level of manual labor?
It's staggering. You have to visualize thousands of small crews working simultaneously in almost every ravine and gully across the entire continent.
Wow.
And these check dams, they were relatively small structures, often just built from local stone or brush or timber.
Right, whatever they had nearby.
Yeah, and their primary hydrological purpose was purely utilitarian. Slow down the velocity of water rushing through gullies during heavy rains, trap the eroding topsoil before it washed away, and prevent further degradation of the farmland.
But alongside those millions of small erosion control structures, the CCC also constructed around 7,000 larger diversion and storage dams.
And this is where the magic happens. This is where the utilitarian mission of soil conservation intersected perfectly with that new mandate for public recreation.
The sources distill this intersection into what was basically the primary architectural blueprint for the whole era. The golden rule of 1930s park design was essentially dam a creek, build a beach around it.
That equation drove everything. You find a natural valley with a modest creek running through it. You establish a CCC camp nearby.
The young men get out their heavy hand tools.
They quarry local stone. They construct this sturdy, permanent dam across the creek to control downstream flooding and trap sediment. But, and here's the pivot, as the water backs up behind the dam and floods the valley to create a reservoir, the planners do not stop at flood control.
No, they truck in thousands of tons of sand.
To line the new shoreline, they literally construct a beach.
It's brilliant. You take a flood control project and you manufacture a swimming hole.
You manufacture an entire recreational ecosystem. Because once the beach is in place, the CCC utilizes the exact same quarried stone and heavy timber to build a bathhouse.
They construct a boathouse.
They build picnic shelters with permanent stone fireplaces. The exact same physical labor that fought the national emergency of soil loss was harnessed to manufacture dedicated places for public play.
It's an absolute triumph of dual-use planning. Let's actually try to visualize this from the perspective of the people living through it.
Okay.
Put yourself in the mid-1930s. The psychological weight of the Great Depression is just immense. Financial anxiety is a constant daily reality, but it's a sweltering Saturday in July.
And no air conditioning.
Exactly. So your family decides to take your relatively new automobile out of the crowded hot city. You drive an hour into the rural countryside onto land that just a few years ago was a failed, dusty, abandoned farm.
Just a wasteland.
Right. But as you arrive, you pull up to this shimmering, brand new lake that definitely did not exist the last time you were in the area.
It's like magic.
You walk past a massive, beautifully constructed cut stone bathhouse, built in that classic park rustic style, heavy timber beams, local stone that looks like it just grew right out of the ground.
It feels very organic.
Yeah. And you smell charcoal and burgers cooking on these permanent stone barbecues scattered carefully through the pine trees. You go to the boathouse, you rent a wooden rowboat, and everywhere around the periphery you see these young men in green uniforms, the CCC enrollees, literally laying the final stones on the walking paths.
To an urban family in 1936, that must have felt like an absolute miracle of public works.
Completely. It fundamentally altered the relationship between the citizen and the state. And this miracle wasn't just isolated to a few grand national parks out west either.
No, it was incredibly localized. The CCC helped establish or vastly expand more than 700 state parks.
That's huge.
If you look at the history of states like South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Texas, Pennsylvania, Michigan, their entire modern state park systems were essentially birthed during this single decade.
The physical infrastructure of leisure was poured and quarried and planted in almost every county in the country.
Which brings us to a realization that really fundamentally shifts how we view the modern landscape. Those serene, perfectly integrated lakes that we visit today, the ones that look completely natural.
They aren't geological features.
No, they are 90-year-old water management infrastructure.
So when you're swimming in a beloved state park lake in Pennsylvania, you are literally swimming in a 1930s reservoir.
It's a highly engineered environment. It only feels natural today because 90 years of forest succession and weathering have softened the sharp edges of the masonry.
Right, the moss has grown over the rocks. But the foundation is manufactured. We are vacationing inside a public works project.
Exactly.
But as the agency records indicate, building the lake is really only the first step, because once you create a pristine artificial lake and invite the public to enjoy it, human nature dictates the next demand.
People want to fish.
People arriving at a lake expect to catch fish.
And that expectation crashed hard into a really harsh biological reality. Because by the 1930s, decades of completely unregulated, intensive commercial and recreational fishing, combined with severe industrial pollution from the late 19th century.
And widespread habitat destruction.
Right. All of that had left American waterways severely depleted. So you had thousands of beautiful new artificial lakes and thousands of miles of streams running through these new parks, but the water was practically barren.
Empty. So if the New Deal's answer to mass unemployment was a massive army of labor, their answer to barren rivers was equally immense. They initiated industrial-scale fish restocking, overseen by the Bureau of Fisheries.
And they didn't simply attempt to regulate fishing, like with catch limits. They decided to physically manufacture the fish to meet the new public demands.
Which requires insane infrastructure.
Astounding infrastructure. The CCC built 4,105 fish-rearing pools and hatcheries across the country.
4,000 hatcheries.
Yeah. And simultaneously, they performed what they termed stream improvements on over 6,200 miles of waterways. The objective was to engineer the physical habitat to successfully receive this massive influx of fish they were breeding.
The scale of this restocking effort is just fascinating to me. Because instead of gently trying to nurse a delicate ecosystem back to health, the approach was closer to brute force manufacturing.
That's exactly what it was.
It's like, I don't know, noticing your bank account is overdrawn, and instead of just depositing a little money, you buy the entire bank. The scale of the response was massive.
It really was. Let's actually look closely at exactly how many fish were introduced into these systems, because this specific data point offers a great lesson in how historical myths are generated.
Oh, I love this part.
If you read popular histories of the New Deal, or even glance at some of the local historical markers in state parks, you will frequently encounter this sweeping claim that the CCC stocked over 1 billion fish, or sometimes they even say nearly 2 billion.
It's a very satisfying, monumental number. It fits the legend of the era perfectly.
It sounds like folklore, right? The kind of statistic that gets rounded up over decades of storytelling.
Yeah. We stocked billions of fish. But the meticulously documented historical figure, compiled directly from the CCC's own internal accomplishment tables, is far more specific.
What is the exact number?
The documented total is exactly 636,447,728 fingerlings and young fish.
Over 636 million fish.
The precision of that number, down to the final 28, just shows exactly how bureaucratically organized this whole effort was.
It really highlights the administrative machinery of the New Deal. And honestly, we don't need to inflate the number to 1 billion to recognize its impact.
No, 500 million is plenty.
Introducing over 500 million predatory fish into waterways completely altered the biological and ecological makeup of the continent.
Okay, but I really want to explore the sheer logistics of this. Moving 500 million living creatures in the 1930s, you have hatcheries breeding millions of fragile fingerlings. But the target streams and the new artificial lakes were often hundreds of miles away, deep in newly designated parkland.
Right, out in the middle of nowhere.
How did they physically transport hundreds of millions of fish across the country and actually keep them alive without modern transportation technology?
Well, the Bureau of Fisheries, relying entirely on CCC labor, again designed and operated this highly mechanized fleet of custom fish stocking trucks.
Custom trucks just for fish.
Yeah. Because moving water and living fish over long distances requires solving a huge problem, oxygenation. If you just put fish in a sealed barrel, they suffocate very, very quickly.
Right.
So these specialized trucks utilized large canvas tanks.
Wait, canvas, like heavy fabric.
Exactly, heavy canvas holding the water. And they employed early rudimentary mechanical aeration techniques. Sometimes they literally relied on the actual sloshing of the water over rough roads to maintain dissolved oxygen.
Just the bumps in the road keeping the fish breathing.
Literally. Later on, they started integrating early air compressors powered by the truck's engine. But yeah, these convoys drove over incredibly rough, newly cut logging roads deep into the backcountry just to systematically dump millions of fingerlings into the newly built reservoirs.
It really is the final step in an assembly line of recreation. They dig the lake, they truck in the sand for the beach, they build the bathhouse, and then a convoy of canvas tank trucks pulls up to the shore and literally pours the fish into the water so a father and son can cast the line the very next morning.
They manufactured the entirety of the experience, from the topography down to the biology.
But, engineering the water was really only half the battle for wildlife conservation. If you were standing on the beach of one of these new lakes in 1935 and looked up, you would realize the skies required equally urgent intervention.
The bird populations.
Yeah, the populations of migratory birds, specifically waterfowl, were in a catastrophic freefall.
The crisis facing waterfowl really requires us to look at the origins of the National Wildlife Refuge System. Now, the philosophical concept of a federal wildlife refuge wasn't actually invented in the 1930s.
Right, Theodore Roosevelt had famously established Pelican Island as the first federal bird reservation way back in 1903.
Exactly. However, for decades, the refuge system existed primarily on paper. The federal government lacked the massive funding apparatus, and they lacked the physical labor force required to actually acquire vast tracts of land and physically construct habitats on a continental scale.
That structural deficit changes entirely in 1934, though, with the passage of the Migratory Bird Hunting Stamp Act.
Universally known as the duck stamp.
The duck stamp. The history of this stamp is remarkable, largely because the individual who championed it.
J.N. Darling,
Wow.
universally known as Ding Darling.
Ding Darling is such a fascinating historical figure to me, because he wasn't a career Washington bureaucrat, and he wasn't a formally trained research biologist.
No, he was a cartoonist.
A Pulitzer Prize-winning political cartoonist for a newspaper in Iowa.
He was a cartoonist, but he was also one of the most passionate and effective conservationists of his era. Darling deeply understood that the rampant destruction of wetland habitats, primarily for agricultural expansion, was the main driver decimating duck and goose populations.
They had nowhere to land, nowhere to nest.
Right. So when he was appointed as the chief of the Bureau of Biological Survey, he faced this really pragmatic reality. In the depths of the Great Depression, Congress was absolutely not going to appropriate millions of taxpayer dollars to purchase swamps for ducks.
The political will simply wasn't there. People were starving.
Exactly. So Darling utilized his influence to push through the Duck Stamp Act.
And he leveraged his artistic background directly, didn't he? He actually sketched the artwork for the very first stamp himself.
He did. He drew this beautiful sketch of two mallards preparing to land in a marsh. But the brilliance of Darling's policy wasn't just the artwork, it was the ingenious funding mechanism it created.
How did it work?
Under the new law, if you wanted to legally hunt migratory waterfowl anywhere in the United States, you were required to purchase this federal stamp and affix it to your state hunting license.
So it functioned as a highly targeted user fee.
Exactly. And the critical component was that the revenue generated from the sale of these stamps did not just vanish into the general treasury to be spent on whatever.
Right, it was protected.
It was legally ring-fenced into a special fund used exclusively to acquire, protect, and manage wetland habitats.
Which creates a fascinating, almost paradoxical loop of funding. Think about it. The hunters were effectively taxing their own activity to fund the permanent preservation of the exact marshlands they utilized for hunting.
It's an incredibly powerful, self-sustaining financial engine. It is widely considered one of the most successful pieces of conservation policy ever enacted.
Wow.
However, there's a catch. A piece of legislation, no matter how brilliantly funded, cannot physically alter the landscape.
Right, policy can purchase a deed to a swamp, but a piece of paper cannot dig a trench or build a dike or manipulate water levels.
Ding Darling had successfully built the funding pipeline, but he desperately needed physical muscle to convert that policy into functioning biological infrastructure.
Which brings the CCC right back to the center of the narrative.
This is where the profound symbiosis of New Deal programs really occurs. The duck stamp revenue purchased the raw acreage, but the CCC camps provided an endless, highly organized supply of manual labor.
A perfect match.
CCC crews were deployed directly into these newly acquired refuges to build the actual infrastructure of conservation. They constructed miles of earthen dikes to meticulously manage water levels across different seasons.
Just digging and piling earth by hand.
Yeah, and they used heavy machinery and shovels to build protected nesting islands right in the middle of the marshes. They dug massive impoundments to hold water during droughts. The National Wildlife Refuge System, as a physical reality as managed geography rather than just lines on a map, was cemented into the earth by the CCC during this decade.
You know, up to this point in our analysis, the historical narrative feels incredibly triumphant. We have a government putting millions of desperate young men to work, creating unprecedented public park systems for the working class, saving fisheries from collapse, and building a continent-wide network of wildlife refuges.
It reads as an unmitigated American success story.
It really does. It's a remarkable achievement. But to fulfill the mission of this deep dive, We have to look impartially at the entire historical record.
And the history of conservation is rarely a simplistic narrative of unbroken heroism.
Definitely not. We have to examine the assumptions and the scientific blind spots that govern these massive projects.
Which requires us to pivot to the shadow side of the 1930s conservation movement. It's a difficult aspect of the history to process, but it is absolutely essential to understanding how we shaped the modern ecosystem.
We need to analyze the eradication and poison campaigns.
The archival sources are very, very explicit about this mandate. We just discussed the Bureau of Biological Survey, the agency that, under Ding Darling's leadership, was fighting tirelessly to save waterfowl and wetlands.
The heroes of the ducks.
Right. But that exact same federal bureau, utilizing the exact same pool of CCC labor, was executing a parallel mandate that was fundamentally destructive. To understand this, we really must understand the prevailing mindset of forestry and agricultural science in the 1930s.
And looking at the sources, that consensus was essentially to treat the wilderness as an agricultural garden.
Precisely. Think about it. If you're a farmer managing a garden, your goal is to cultivate the good plants and aggressively eradicate the weeds.
You want to maximize the yield of the stuff you actually want.
Exactly. In the 1930s, this binary agricultural logic was applied directly to complex wildlife ecosystems. There were species deemed good or beneficial: deer, elk, game birds, sport fish, essentially, animals that humans desired to hunt or photograph.
The desirable crops.
Right. And then there's a vast category of species deemed bad.
The predators and the foundational rodents. The animals officially classified in the documents as vermin.
Vermin, yes. Wolves, coyotes, mountain lions, bears, as well as prairie dogs, jackrabbits, and ground squirrels.
They just lumped them all together.
They were viewed through a strictly utilitarian lens as direct threats. They preyed upon the good game animals, and more importantly, they were viewed as an existential economic threat to the powerful agricultural and livestock interests dominating the American West.
So the sheep and cattle ranchers wanted them gone.
Consequently, the Bureau of Biological Survey was tasked with implementing rigorous predator and rodent control programs. And in practice, control was just a bureaucratic euphemism for systematic eradication.
And they deployed the CCC to execute this eradication on an industrial scale. I mean, the internal logs detail campaigns that go far, far beyond a few government hunters tracking a nuisance wolf. This was a continental-scale chemical assault.
It was.
The records note that in the state of Idaho alone, aggressive rodent control campaigns operated simultaneously out of 31 different CCC camps.
31 camps just poisoning rodents. The scale of the chemical application is deeply unsettling when analyzed through a modern ecological framework.
It's hard to read about.
CCC crews were mobilized across millions of acres of western public lands with strict quotas. Their primary method was spreading tons of poison grain over vast territories, specifically designed to wipe out entire populations of prairie dogs and jackrabbits.
And what about the larger predators?
For the apex predators, the coyotes and the remaining wolves, the crews utilized strychnine and highly lethal poison bait stations. It was a broad-spectrum, indiscriminate approach, and it was devastatingly effective at clearing the landscape of target species.
Let's interrogate the biological mechanics of this strategy for a minute. Because anyone with a fundamental understanding of food web today recognizes that an ecosystem is an interlocking architecture.
Everything is connected.
Right. If you systematically remove the apex predators and the foundational rodents, you are pulling the load-bearing pillars out of the system. What were the specific cascading failures caused by these campaigns?
The long-term ecological consequences were profound, and they were immediate. When you systematically remove apex predators like wolves and coyotes, you eliminate the primary biological control mechanism for herbivore populations.
The deer have nothing hunting them.
Exactly. Without predation, populations of deer and elk explode unnaturally. These massive herds then overgraze the landscape, stripping away young saplings, destroying riparian vegetation along riverbanks, and ultimately causing severe soil erosion and habitat degradation for countless other species.
The very erosion they were trying to stop at the check dams.
The irony is dark, yes.
And what happens when you poison the rodents? Like, what is the specific mechanical role of an animal like a prairie dog?
Prairie dogs are the classic example of what modern ecologists term a keystone species. Their biological function is foundational to the entire plains ecosystem.
Why are they so important? Well, their extensive burrowing systems physically aerate the dense prairie soil, allowing water to penetrate. Their abandoned burrows provide essential, ready-made shelter for dozens of other species: burrowing owls, black-footed ferrets, various reptiles.
They're essentially building the housing for the prairie.
They are. Furthermore, the prairie dogs themselves are the primary calorie source for an entire tier of predators, from eagles to badgers.
So they feed everybody and house everybody.
Exactly. When the CCC crews spread strychnine-laced grain and exterminated entire prairie dog towns stretching for miles, they weren't just killing rodents, they were physically dismantling the biological infrastructure of the Western Plains.
I want to push back on the historical context here, though, because it's very easy for us to sit here with a century of advanced ecological science and just judge the actions of men in 1935.
Of course, hindsight is 20/20.
Right. But a critical question arises from the sources. Was this eradication campaign a product of innocent, well-intentioned ignorance? Like, did the scientific community truly believe they were fixing a broken machine, or was there active resistance to this policy at the time?
That is the most frustrating and tragic element of this shadow legacy. They were explicitly warned by their own peers.
They knew?
The historical record shows that the American Society of Mammalogists, which was the preeminent scientific body of experts studying mammal biology in the country, forcefully condemned the Bureau's predator and rodent control program as ecologically reckless.
Wow.
And they did this as early as 1930, before the CCC was even formed. They testified that removing predators would cause herbivore populations to crash their own ecosystems. They understood the concept of ecological balance.
So if the leading scientists of the era are loudly warning the federal government that this is a catastrophic mistake, why does the Bureau of Biological Survey entirely ignore them? Was the political leverage of the ranching industry simply insurmountable?
It was a potent combination of immense political pressure and deep-seated institutional arrogance. The agricultural and sheep ranching lobbies in the West wielded massive political influence in Washington.
And they just wanted the predators dead.
Their absolute priority was maximizing grazing land and protecting livestock from predation, and they demanded federal action to sterilize the ranges of threats. But internally, the federal bureaus possessed a profound hubris regarding their own ability to engineer nature.
They thought they knew best.
They viewed the mammalogists as overly academic, sentimental theorists who just didn't understand the practical realities of land management. The Bureau leadership genuinely believed they possessed the expertise to surgically extract the components of the ecosystem they found inconvenient without triggering a collapse of the whole system.
It's the ultimate manifestation of treating nature like a simple combustion engine. You assume you can just reach in, unscrew a gear you don't like, throw it away, and the engine will continue to run perfectly.
But ecosystems operate on chaos and deep interdependency.
Exactly. And this mechanical approach to nature extended way beyond the poison campaigns. While the Biological Survey was targeting the animals, the massive engineering projects of the CCC, that millions of dams and water structures we celebrated earlier, were inadvertently targeting the physical habitats themselves.
Yes.
Which brings us to the profound ecological bill that eventually came due for the American weekend.
We have to evaluate what modern hydrology and biology now recognize as the severe unintended costs of the CCC's water control infrastructure. And the clearest place to see this damage is in their treatment of wetlands.
The juxtaposition here is just striking. Because while Ding Darling is utilizing duck stamp funds to frantically protect and build marshes for waterfowl, CCC crews on other projects are being deployed to actively destroy wetlands.
It reflects the fractured, often contradictory nature of New Deal policies. Outside of the specific influential constituency of waterfowl hunters, wetlands in the 1930s were almost universally viewed with hostility.
Right, they weren't considered ecosystems.
Not at all. They were considered geography that had failed. They were viewed as useless, impassable swamps, breeding grounds for mosquitoes and disease, or, at best, potentially valuable agricultural acreage that was simply too saturated to plow.
Therefore, the logical engineering solution was aggressive drainage.
Massive systematic drainage. The CCC engaged in extensive drainage ditching operations across vast swaths of the country.
Digging trenches.
They utilized heavy drag lines and thousands of men with shovels to carve deep, straight trenches through marshlands, effectively bleeding the water out of the landscape to dry it out for development or agriculture.
And the modern retrospective data from the EPA makes it incredibly clear that this was a fundamental miscalculation.
It was an ecological catastrophe. Modern environmental science recognizes wetlands as among the most vital and productive ecosystems on Earth. They function as the kidneys of the broader landscape.
Filtering everything.
Exactly. Their complex root systems and biological processes filter out heavy metals, absorb excess nutrients, and naturally purify the water table. They provide unparalleled nursery habitats for thousands of aquatic and terrestrial species.
But they also protect us, right, from floods.
Perhaps most crucially for human infrastructure, yes. Wetlands act as massive natural sponges. During severe storms and hurricanes, intact marshes absorb massive amounts of excess rainfall and storm surge, serving as essential flood buffers.
So when the CCC carved those trenches and drained the marshes, they permanently degraded the landscape's natural ability to mitigate flooding and sustain biodiversity.
They threw away the sponge.
And the engineering intervention didn't stop at still water. They applied the exact same logic to moving rivers. The sources detail a practice called stream improvement or stream channelization.
Yes.
And bureaucratically, the term improvement sounds entirely positive, almost benevolent. But the physical reality of the work was violently disruptive.
The intention behind channelization was, again, rooted in a desire for efficiency, specifically regarding flood control. The engineering logic was straightforward. If a natural stream meanders and curves through a valley, the water moves slowly.
Makes sense.
During a torrential downpour, that slow-moving water backs up and overflows its banks, causing local flooding. The engineers decided that the solution was to force the water to exit the valley as rapidly as possible.
So they just straightened the river.
To achieve this, CCC crews would engage in severe channelization. They would literally bulldoze the natural bends and meanders out of a river. They would pull out all the downed timber, boulders, and natural debris and carve a straight, deep, uniform trench.
Wow.
In extreme cases, they would line the banks with stone or concrete to create a completely frictionless chute.
Let's use an analogy to really understand why this is so devastating. Imagine a beautiful, winding, scenic country road. It meanders through hills. It forces drivers to slow down. There are small turnoffs, mature trees lining the edges, and communities built close to the route.
Very picturesque.
Right. Now imagine highway engineers look at this road and declare it hopelessly inefficient for moving traffic. So they bulldoze the entire area and replace the winding road with a perfectly straight concrete superhighway.
Okay.
Yes, the vehicles, or in this case the water, will move from point A to point B at a significantly higher velocity. But in the pursuit of speed, you have entirely obliterated the neighborhood where everyone actually lived.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the hydrological mechanism at play, because when you channelize a stream and turn it into a superhighway, you completely alter the physics of the water.
It moves too fast.
By straightening the channel, you drastically reduce the friction and massively increase the water velocity. And when water moves at high speed, it acts like an industrial pressure washer.
Just stripping everything away.
It relentlessly scours the riverbed. It blows out all the natural, complex habitats, specifically the pool and riffle sequences. It destroys the deep, quiet pools where adult fish rest and hide from predators. And it completely washes away the shallow, gravel-lined riffles where aquatic insects breed and fish lay their eggs.
So the fish are just left with a sterile fire hose of water. There's nowhere to rest, nowhere to feed, and nowhere to reproduce.
The biological carrying capacity of the stream drops to near zero. Furthermore, because the water is rocketing downstream in a deep trench, instead of slowly meandering and gently rising over its banks, it severely degrades the surrounding floodplain.
The soil doesn't get the water it needs.
The adjacent soil is no longer nourished by seasonal, gentle floods. Instead, the high-velocity water simply carves a deeper and deeper canyon, disconnecting the river from its own valley. It was a well-intentioned engineering solution designed to stop floods, but it created an aquatic dead zone.
This mechanical approach to water brings us to what I think is the most significant reckoning in the archives. Because it wasn't just the straightened streams that carried a hidden cost. The true ecological bill centers on the dams.
The dams.
We have to return to those 7,000 diversion dams and the staggering 6.6 million check dams that we highlighted as the big triumphs of Section 2. The structures that created the beloved state park swimming beaches.
Right.
It turns out you cannot fundamentally alter the flow of millions of waterways without the broader ecosystem eventually breaking down.
This represents the most dramatic paradigm shift in how we understand our public lands. For decades, those small, picturesque recreational dams were universally celebrated as pure public goods.
They provided swimming. They provided boating. They looked beautiful.
But today, when modern aquatic biologists survey those exact same structures, they do not see a recreational asset. They see a massive, concrete ecological choke point.
Let's break down the mechanics of that damage. Because on a superficial level, a park lake looks incredibly healthy and vibrant to us. How exactly does a small 15-foot stone dam slowly kill a river system?
The primary mechanism of destruction is fragmentation. A healthy river system is designed to function as a continuous, unbroken biological corridor.
Everything needs to flow.
Fish, macroinvertebrates, essential nutrients, and natural sediment, they all must be able to move freely up and down the entire length of the watershed. When you construct a dam, even a relatively modest stone structure in a state park, you physically sever that connection.
You literally build a wall across the highway.
You create an impassable barrier. Migratory fish species, which rely on moving upstream to reach their historical cold water spawning grounds, simply hit a stone wall and cannot reproduce. The river is chopped into isolated, deteriorating segments.
And the dam doesn't just block movement. It fundamentally alters the chemistry and physics of the water itself, right?
Right, drastically. Consider the physical difference between a natural stream and a reservoir. A natural, free-flowing stream is typically shaded by a forest canopy. The water is constantly tumbling over rocks to aerate itself, and it remains relatively cool.
Because it's moving.
Right. When you dam that stream and flood the valley to create a wide, shallow reservoir for a swimming beach, you drastically increase the surface area of the water exposed to direct sunlight. The water stops moving, sits in the summer sun, and basically bakes.
Oh, wow.
This artificially elevates the water temperature far beyond the natural baseline of the original stream.
And water temperature directly dictates oxygen levels.
Exactly. This is basic chemistry. Warm water holds significantly less dissolved oxygen than cold, highly aerated water. By warming the water, you are effectively suffocating the native ecosystem.
Because the native fish need cold water.
The indigenous cold water species, like specialized native trouts that evolved to thrive in highly oxygenated streams, suffer immense physiological stress and eventually die off in the new, stagnant lake environment.
So you create this hot, oxygen-depleted environment, and I imagine that vacant biological real estate doesn't stay empty for long?
Nature abhors a vacuum. That warm, still water, low oxygen environment becomes the perfect, hospitable breeding ground for invasive species.
Of course.
Aggressive, non-native fish and invasive aquatic plants, which evolved to thrive in exactly those stagnant conditions, quickly colonize the reservoir and violently outcompete whatever struggling native life remains.
The tragic irony is just profound.
Mm-hmm.
The very architectural structures that brought millions of American families to the water's edge were simultaneously quietly suffocating the complex life beneath the surface.
Which leads us to a reality that is both poetic and deeply complex. We really have to examine the modern restoration movement.
Because it's happening right now.
Today, right now, we have contemporary conservation corps. We have teams of young people in hard hats, high visibility gear, and work boots out in the woods, carrying forward the legacy of environmental stewardship. But their mandate is remarkably different from their predecessors.
It's the exact opposite almost.
Often, their highest calling is not to build new infrastructure. Their job is to physically hike into these state parks and systematically undo the manual labor of their grandfathers.
It is the defining paradox of modern ecological management. You have highly trained contemporary crews utilizing jackhammers, excavators, and heavy machinery to punch bypass holes in or completely demolish the heavy cut stone dams that the 1930s CCC enrollees so proudly built by hand.
Yes, tearing down the monuments.
These modern teams are laboring to introduce structural meanders back into the rivers their predecessors violently straightened. They're using heavy equipment to tear out the old drainage tiles and intentionally reflood the marshes the CCC spent years training.
They are systematically dismantling the 1930s infrastructure to allow the hydrological systems to breathe and function naturally again.
I really want you, the listener, to truly consider the human element of this reversal for a moment. Imagine being a 19-year-old enrollee in 1935. You are desperate, your family has absolutely no income, and the federal government gives you a purpose. You pour months of sweat, pride, and backbreaking manual labor into quarrying stone and building a beautiful, enduring dam across creek. You believe with absolute certainty that you are saving the country's soil and providing a noble public service.
And you were right. In a sociological sense, you provided generations of working-class families with a place to swim and bond.
Right. And yet, 90 years later, another 19-year-old in a conservation uniform arrives at your masterpiece with a sledgehammer, because the structure you built to save the country is currently killing the ecosystem.
It perfectly distills the central thesis of the archival sources.
This entire saga is the story of the uncosted landscape.
The uncosted landscape.
An entire generation, driven by genuine desperation and soaring optimism, successfully built undeniable democratic public goods. They built the trails, the park pavilions, the accessible lakes. But they engineered these goods based on the deeply flawed mechanical ecological assumptions of their era.
They just didn't know the full biological cost.
They quietly and often entirely unknowingly externalized the severe long-term biological damage.
The philosophical friction here is stunning. The exact physical structures that successfully taught the American public to love and value nature, the accessible campgrounds, the placid swimming lakes, the heavily stocked fishing streams, were the exact same structures degrading the biological integrity of that nature. We were taught to love a version of the outdoors that was fundamentally structurally broken.
And that complex ledger is what modern conservationists are left to balance. We must acknowledge the triumph. The CCC successfully constructed the physical stage for the American outdoor weekend.
They absolutely democratized leisure on an unprecedented scale.
They transformed a society where outdoor vacations were an elite privilege into one where hundreds of state parks were accessible to anyone with a Ford. They physically built the infrastructure that sustains the massive wildlife refuges.
But that monumental legacy is permanently, inextricably linked to its shadow. The chemically eradicated predator populations, the violently drained wetlands, and the millions of stone check dams that slowly choke the vitality out of the river systems. As we conclude this deep dive, I want to connect this history directly to your life, because understanding this complex legacy fundamentally changes how you experience your next weekend getaway.
It definitely changes how you see a park.
The next time you pack up your car, drive out to a state park and walk out onto a wooden dock over a serene, glassy lake. Or the next time you hike down a trail and pause to admire a small, moss-covered stone dam spanning a creek. I do not want you to simply see a beautiful, timeless, primordial landscape.
You should view that landscape for what it truly is. A 90-year-old physical debate between the human desire for accessible recreation and the intricate requirements of ecological health. It is a debate cast permanently in quarried stone and manipulated water.
It is a living museum of our evolving, often clumsy relationship with the natural world. But there is a final, provocative thought. I want to leave you with something to carefully consider as you look at the news today.
Oh, this is a great point.
We look back at the engineers and planners of the 1930s, and with the benefit of a century of scientific advancement, we can easily identify their glaring blind spots. We see clearly how arrogant it was to assume you could straighten a complex river or indiscriminately poison a keystone predator without consequence.
It seems obvious to us now.
But today, in our current moment, we are embarking on our own massive generational public works projects.
We are entering the era of massive green infrastructure.
Exactly. We are actively driving massive steel pylons into the ocean floor to build offshore wind farms. We are utilizing heavy machinery to lay down millions of acres of solar panels across fragile desert ecosystems. We are opening massive, deep-pit lithium mines to extract the raw materials necessary to build electric car batteries, all in a desperate effort to fight the existential threat of climate change. And we are executing these modern projects with the exact same sense of urgency and the exact same absolute certainty that we are saving the world that the CCC felt when they poured concrete in 1935.
It's the exact same optimism.
So the profound question we must ask ourselves is, what are our current unrecognized blind spots? In 90 years, when a future generation looks back at our well-intentioned environmental solutions, what hidden ecological costs will they discover that we are currently happily externalizing? It forces you to wonder what kind of modern infrastructure our grandchildren will be tearing down to save the Earth.
That is a very tough pill to swallow, but a necessary question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, look closely at the landscape around you and never stop questioning how it was built.